My morning started with toast, just like any other, but then the phone rang, a frantic, awful sound, and suddenly Finn, my whole world, was in a hospital room, not moving, in a coma. The doctor looked at me, his face grim, and delivered those crushing words, "There's nothing left." But you know what? A quiet smile touched my lips because I had a secret, a thick stack of $500,000 insurance papers tucked in my bag, ready to turn this whole mess around. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. My son, Finn, he's 16, a whirlwind of energy, always messing with his skateboard or sketching weird creatures in his notebook. He's got that lanky, teenage build, all arms and legs that haven't quite figured out where they belong yet, and a mop of sandy hair that's always falling into his bright, curious eyes. Our life, it wasn't fancy, you know? Just me and him in our small apartment, making do. We had our routines, early mornings, me rushing to my job at the library, him grumbling about school, but always getting there, then evenings filled with homework battles and him explaining some new video game. Sundays were for pancakes always. It was simple, sometimes tough, but it was ours, and it felt solid. I loved him, truly, more than words could ever say. He was my whole reason for everything, my best friend, my little shadow who was growing up too fast. I remember this one time, a few years back, when he had a bad fall from his bike. Just a broken arm, nothing too serious, but the hospital bills, oh those bills. They just piled up, like a mountain in front of me. I had decent health insurance then, I thought, but it turned out to be one of those plans with all these hidden clauses, huge deductibles, and a lot of hoops to jump through. I spent weeks on the phone, arguing with people who sounded bored, feeling smaller and smaller with each call. They talked about copays and out-of-network charges, all this confusing stuff, and I just felt so helpless. I remember this one lady from the insurance company, Brenda. Her voice was so sharp, so superior, telling me I should have read the fine print. Her words, they just twisted something inside me. "We've done all we can, Mrs. Olson," she'd said, like I was bothering her. It stung, really stung. I ended up having to take on extra shifts, selling some old jewelry, just to pay it all off. It taught me a hard lesson about trusting others, about making sure I was prepared. I swore, right then and there, that I would never, ever be in that situation again. I started reading everything, researching, saving what little I could. It became a quiet mission, almost an obsession, to be ready for whatever life threw at us. Finn, he didn't know about it, about the extra hours I worked or the sacrifices I made. He just saw his mom, always there, always figuring things out. Then came that awful Tuesday. It started normal, like I said. Toast. Coffee. Finn slamming his bedroom door, then yelling, "Bye, Mom," as he headed out. "Be careful." I called back, like I always did. Just a normal, everyday mom thing. But then, around lunchtime, my phone rang. It wasn't my work number, it was an unknown number. My stomach just dropped, you know? That deep, sinking feeling. I picked it up, my hand shaking. "Is this Elsie Olson?" a calm, yet urgent voice asked. "Yes, this is she," I managed, my voice suddenly thin. "This is St. Jude's Hospital. Your son, Finn Olson, has been in an accident. You need to come here immediately." The rest of the call was a blur of directions, hurried words about a skateboard, a car, something about a street crossing. My legs felt like jelly, but I pushed myself up, grabbed my keys, and practically ran out the door. The library felt a million miles away. The hospital was a maze of white walls and hushed urgency. I found the emergency room, my eyes scanning, searching, praying. A kind-faced nurse, Lena, came to me, her expression sad. "Mrs. Olson, your son is in room 307. A doctor will speak with you shortly." My heart was thrashing against my ribs. Room 307. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, feeling like I was moving through thick mud. When I finally reached the door, I took a deep, shaky breath and pushed it open. And there he was. Finn. Lying so still, so pale, wires and tubes everywhere. He didn't look like my Finn, not the one who just left for school, full of life and laughter. This Finn was broken. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to focus. This was real. This was happening. I reached out, gently touching his hand. It was warm, but limp. "Oh, Finn," I whispered, my voice cracking. After what felt like an eternity, a man in a white coat walked in. Dr. Silas. He had sharp, cold eyes and a tired slump to his shoulders. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mrs. Olson," he started, his voice flat, "your son was hit by a car. Severe head trauma. He's in a deep coma." He paused, looking at some charts. "We've stabilized him, but the damage is extensive. The prognosis is grim. There's significant brain swelling." My breath caught in my throat. He went on, talking about different procedures, the long-shot chances, the potential costs. "We'll do what we can, of course, but without significant resources for specialized long-term care and given the nature of his injuries. Mrs. Olson, sometimes there's just nothing left to work with." He said it so clinically, so detached, like he was talking about a broken machine, not my son. "The hospital can provide basic care, but anything beyond that will be difficult. Most insurance plans won't cover experimental treatments or extended rehabilitation for such severe cases." He looked at me, almost pityingly, but with a hint of resignation. He assumed I was like all the other parents, scrambling, hoping for a miracle they couldn't afford. But that cold, dismissive tone, those words, nothing left, they hit me hard, but they also ignited something. A quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't the first time someone had told me I had nothing left. This wasn't the first time I felt helpless. But it would be the last. I smiled then, a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes, looking directly at Dr. Silas. "Actually, doctor," I said, my voice soft but firm, "I think we'll be just fine." I brought something with me. I reached into my oversized tote bag, past my worn wallet and a half-eaten granola bar, and pulled out a thick, official-looking envelope. The paper rustled loudly in the otherwise silent room. Dr. Silas blinked, his cold eyes widening just a fraction as he looked at the envelope in my hand. He hadn't expected that, not from a mother who looked as weary and heartbroken as I did. He took the papers, almost reluctantly, his brow furrowed as he scanned the first page. I watched his face closely, seeing the subtle shift. First, confusion, then surprise, and then a grudging respect, maybe? He flipped through the documents, a thick stack detailing a premium catastrophic injury insurance policy. Not just any policy, mind you. This was the one I'd spent years researching, paying into, making sure it covered everything, no loopholes, no hidden clauses, after that humiliating experience with Brenda and Finn's broken arm. This wasn't about regular health insurance. It was a special, high-tier policy designed precisely for moments like this, covering up to $500,000 for specialized medical treatment, long-term care, and rehabilitation, no matter the severity of the injury. A catastrophic injury policy, he murmured, almost to himself, reading the name of the insurer and the policy amount. $500,000. He looked up at me, a completely different expression on his face now. The pity was gone, replaced by a sort of professional awe. "Mrs. Olson, this changes things entirely." The words were like a balm to my raw nerves, a quiet victory bell in my head. This was it. This was why I'd worked those extra shifts, why I'd gone without new clothes, why I'd meticulously saved. This was my answer to Brenda, to every system that tried to make you feel small and powerless. Suddenly, the sterile hospital room didn't feel so hopeless. Dr. Silas excused himself, saying he needed to speak with the hospital administration and the medical team. When he came back, less than an hour later, his demeanor was entirely different. He was no longer dismissive or resigned. He was attentive, respectful. "Mrs. Olson," he said, pulling up a chair beside Finn's bed, "we've reviewed the policy. It's comprehensive. We can get Finn into the neuro ICU. We can consult with specialists, consider experimental treatments, whatever is deemed medically necessary. This level of funding opens up many more avenues for his recovery." Over the next few days, the change was dramatic. Finn was moved to a private room in the neuro ICU. A team of specialists, led by Dr. Silas, gathered to discuss his case. They talked about new medications, advanced monitoring, innovative therapies that I hadn't even known existed. The nurses, too, were warmer, more communicative. They saw me not as a grieving parent to be placated, but as an advocate, someone with resources, someone who needed to be kept fully informed. I spent every waking moment by Finn's bedside, talking to him, reading to him, just holding his hand. He was still in a coma, still unresponsive, but the doctors were now speaking of stabilization, of potential for recovery, words that had been absent before. It was a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark in the vast darkness. But life, and especially insurance companies, rarely make things easy. About a week later, I received a call. It wasn't the hospital. It was the insurance company. And who should be on the other end but Brenda, the same cold, sharp-voiced woman from years ago. My blood ran cold, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "Mrs. Olson," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, "I'm calling regarding Finn's claim. We're reviewing the details, and there appear to be discrepancies." My knuckles went white as I gripped the phone. Discrepancies? I had meticulously checked every single detail of that policy. "What discrepancies, Brenda?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, remembering the humiliation she'd inflicted before. "Well," she purred, "the policy states catastrophic injury not resulting from reckless endangerment. We have reports suggesting Finn was skateboarding in a restricted area, not wearing a helmet. That could be considered reckless." A wave of panic washed over me. Reckless endangerment? This was a wait, what, moment for sure. Was this it? Was all my planning, all my sacrifice, about to be undone by a technicality? I remembered Finn telling me he'd started wearing his helmet again after a small fall. Had he? I wasn't there. My heart started to pound. This felt like the rug being pulled out from under me, just as Finn was starting to get the care he needed. Brenda continued, "If the investigation confirms reckless endangerment, the policy's payout could be significantly reduced, or even denied entirely for certain treatments. We're talking about a substantial sum, Mrs. Olson. We wouldn't want to overcommit funds prematurely, would we?" Her words were like daggers, twisted with a false concern that only made me angrier. It was the same tactic she'd used before, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong, like I was being unreasonable. The old humiliation, the feeling of being powerless against the system, it surged back, hot and bitter. This was her, trying to break me again. But this time, I wasn't just fighting for a broken arm, Bill. This was for Finn's life. This was for everything. I took a deep breath, pushing down the panic, remembering that quiet resolve. I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. Brenda's words hung in the air, a poisonous cloud. Reckless endangerment, she'd said. Significantly reduced, or even denied entirely. My hands were shaking, but a cold, clear anger settled in my chest. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice, about Finn's future, and about a deeply personal slight from years ago. I wouldn't let her humiliate me again, not while my son lay fighting for his life. That night, I barely slept. I reread every single page of the policy, every word of the fine print I had studied so carefully. I called a lawyer friend, Robert, who specialized in insurance law. He listened patiently, then advised me to gather every piece of evidence I could, Finn's school records, any photos, and most importantly, the police report from the accident. The police report was key. It stated Finn was indeed wearing a helmet, which was found fractured, but still on his head at the scene. It also mentioned the car's speed and the driver's distraction. It made no mention of reckless skateboarding. Equipped with this, and Robert's advice, I scheduled another call with Brenda. This wasn't just a phone call, it was a battle. "Brenda," I started, my voice steady, "I have the police report right here. It clearly states Finn was wearing a helmet, and there's no mention of reckless endangerment. In fact, it details the driver's negligence." I could almost hear her stiffen on the other end. "A police report isn't always the full story, Mrs. Olson. Our investigators are still. Are your investigators going to argue with official police documentation?" I interrupted, cutting her off, something I never would have dared to do before. My voice was firm, resolute. "Because if they are, I'm prepared to have my lawyer, Robert Davies. Perhaps you know him. He's quite prominent in insurance litigation. Discuss this with your legal department. He's very good at making sure policies are honored, especially when there are clear attempts to avoid responsibility. There was a long silence on Brenda's end. The silence was golden. It was the sound of a bully being called out, of power shifting. When she finally spoke, her tone was significantly less sharp, almost hesitant. Mrs. Olson, there's no need to involve lawyers. We merely wanted to ensure due diligence. If the police report clarifies the circumstances, then that's perfectly acceptable. We will, of course, honor the full terms of your policy. A quiet, triumphant smile spread across my face. It wasn't loud, it wasn't boastful, but it was real. My quiet revenge. I had stood up for myself, for Finn, and I had won. A few weeks later, something incredible happened. Finn opened his eyes. It was a moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes, even Dr. Silas. He didn't speak, not yet, but his eyes, those familiar bright eyes, looked at me, and I knew he was still in there. The hospital, with all the resources the $500,000 policy provided, had done everything possible. Physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, they were all working with him tirelessly. The money wasn't just numbers, it was Finn's chance, his second life. He started to make small, slow progress. A squeeze of my hand. A slight nod, just a tiny movement of his head, when I asked him if he wanted me to read his favorite comic book. The change in the atmosphere around Finn was palpable. Dr. Silas, once so grim, now frequently spoke of miracles and remarkable resilience. He would stop by, not just as a doctor, but almost like a friend, sharing small victories with me. He moved his toe today, Mrs. Olson. A purposeful movement. He was invested, genuinely invested. The final arc closed when Finn was strong enough to come home, still needing a lot of care, but home. He could speak in short sentences, he could move with assistance, and most importantly, he was him. The light was back in his eyes. The humiliation I had felt years ago, the feeling of being powerless and discarded, it had fueled me to become strong, prepared. It had transformed into a quiet, unwavering power. I had not just secured Finn's recovery, I had rewritten our story. Brenda never called again. The insurance company settled all bills without further argument. Every element introduced had paid off, creating a narrative of resilience, careful planning, and a mother's fierce, unwavering love. One afternoon, sitting by Finn's bed in our living room, watching him slowly sketch in his notebook again, albeit with a shaky hand, he looked up at me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice still a little weak, "you saved me, didn't you?" I smiled, a real, full smile this time, tears brimming in my eyes. "We saved each other, buddy," I told him, squeezing his hand. "We always do." That policy, that $500,000, wasn't just about money. It was about proving that you can stand up, even when someone tells you there's nothing left. It was about turning a deep, painful humiliation into the strength to fight for everything you love. It changed our lives, not just physically, but deep inside. It showed us that even in the darkest moments, hope and preparedness can turn everything around. So, if you've ever felt like you're up against an impossible wall, remember Finn's story. What's your impossible wall right now? Share your thoughts.